Now, we have long, Mr. President, had this exemption for hiring mandates. And in fact, when I served in the House of Representatives, I'd been the president of a Southern Baptist university. I understood the importance of these institutions. I thought maintaining their faith distinctives as part of why they provide education and health care and daycare and other things. And so I have long been an advocate of a principle that the Supreme Court held up just a few weeks ago, 9-0, that there is a difference in these faith-based institutions. And now that we have health care mandates that could apply to these institutions, all this amendment does is extend the same privilege to them and others who have a religious belief or moral conviction that would they'd be able to defend their moral conviction. We don't do anything about the mandate itself. It's important to understand, Mr. President, that the administration, this one or any other, if the Affordable Health Care Act is still in force, can issue all the mandates that the act would allow. And in fact, if you don't comply with those mandates, you'd have the penalties that the act would allow. But the difference is if the government wouldn't recognize your religious belief or moral conviction, as I think they would likely do. For example, the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. saying this is something we have long held as a tenet of our faith that we don't believe should happen, we shouldn't be part of, and we don't want it to be part of the insurance policies of our schools or our hospitals. My guess is if we pass this amendment, without any question, the Justice Department would say, well, you're certainly going to be able to defend that because that's been your belief for centuries in your faith. This amendment doesn't mention any procedure of any kind. In fact, just this morning, we had a reporter call the office and said, we can't find the word contraception in this amendment anywhere. How's this a vote on contraception? Of course, we were able to say, as we had said 4 days, the word contraception is not in there because it's not about a specific procedure. It's about a faith principle that the First Amendment guarantees.
The first freedom in our Bill of Rights is the liberty to exercise any religion that you might choose, or, for that matter, not participate in any religion whatsoever. And that is what this United States of America is based upon. This concept that you have the freedom to choose what faith you'll belong to, what teachings you will follow, and, as I said, you have the choice to not participate at all if you choose to in this country. Yet the president and my colleagues from across the aisle want to force religious institutions for the first time in the history of our country to violate their strong moral convictions. And they go even further. They want to somehow shroud this and veil it as a woman's health issue. Well, let me set the record straight. This debate is not about that, as some would have you believe. And it's certainly not about contraceptives. What this debate is about is fundamental to our freedom as citizens of this great country. It's religious liberty that we are talking about. It's an American issue that dates back to our very founders, who looked at the war that they had just fought and said to themselves, we are never going to allow our country to force us to attend a certain church or to participate in a certain faith. Not at all. And it was written in one of our most sacred documents, the Bill of Rights. Yet the President of the United States is trampling on this religious freedom and attempting to convince Americans that it's something else. His power grab is forcing religious institutions to go against their deeply held beliefs.
The Founding Fathers put together a document that specified very clearly freedoms that we would have. We've come many, many years since then, but we will lose these freedoms if we don't guard them when even a little chip comes out of it, and that's what they're doing here. Think about this for a minute. We've gotten to the point where this government has gotten so big and so powerful that it has said, look, we don't care about what you believe in your religion because what we're doing here is a good thing. And therefore, you must do what we are telling you because the ends justify the means. And the means is to chip away at the religious freedoms that we as Americans enjoy. It's wrong. It's the way you lose your freedoms. If you turn your back and let a government do this to you, this is how you lose your freedoms. This government is big. It's getting bigger by the day. It is getting more powerful by the day. When they sat around the table in 1776, they had just fought with a government that had been terribly oppressive. And they argued amongst themselves, well, what are we going to do here? Well, we're going to create a government. They knew from a historical perspective, and they knew from their recent experience, that any government that they create needed to be distrusted, needed to be watched, needed to have shackles on it. Because if they didn't, that government would abuse them just as every government has throughout history. So that's why they drew the document that we live under today, the Constitution that we have. They not only gave us one government, they gave us three governments. They gave us a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch, each with a duty to watch the other and beat the other over the head if indeed they got out of line. They were so afraid of a government that they did everything they possibly could to see that that government didn't abuse them. Well, we learn frequently that their fears were well-founded, and today we see once again that their fears were well-founded. What you have here is a government who is saying, we don't care what your religious beliefs are. You must do what we're telling you to do because we think it's the right thing to do, regardless of your religious beliefs. It's wrong. It's got to be fought. It must be reversed.
It used to be that religious freedom was a bipartisan issue, and that's why I am so concerned that this has turned into a purely partisan issue. It's very obvious to me that some of our colleagues on the floor believe they can make political hay by scaring people, by misleading people, that this is somehow about denying women access to contraception when that is not the issue here. This is about protecting our sacred constitutional freedoms. When I say that religious freedom used to be a bipartisan issue, I was referring to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. And I think it's interesting to see who the sponsors and people who were some of the principal proponents of the bill. That demonstrates that it was so bipartisan. The lead sponsor in the House was Senator Chuck Schumer, now a member of the United States Senate. Co-sponsors included then Representative Maria Cantwell, now in the Senate, then Representative Ben Cardin, who's presiding today, and former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. In the Senate, it had 60 co-sponsors. Ted Kennedy was the lead sponsor. We've heard Senator Brown, the senator from Massachusetts, saying the position he's taking on this issue of religious freedom is exactly the same position that Senator Kennedy took during his lifetime. But 60 other members of the Senate co-sponsored it, including Senator Boxer, Senator Feinstein, Senator Kerry, Senator Lautenberg, Senator Leahy, Senator Levin, Senator Murray, and Senator Reid, the majority leader of the United States Senate today. It was signed into law by then President Clinton, demonstrating it was clearly religious freedom was not a partisan issue. It was a bipartisan concern of Congress, and the reason why this bipartisan legislation passed to protect religious freedom.
Unfortunately, many have tried to characterize this amendment as denying women access to contraception. That's a red herring, and it's false. We are talking about government mandates that are interfering with conscience protections here that have long been ingrained in our law. And just to be clear, women had access to these services before the President passed the Affordable Care Act, and after this amendment would be passed, would still have access to these important services. Contrary to what some of my friends on the other side of the aisle have asserted, this measure simply allows healthcare providers and companies to have the same conscience rights they had before the President's healthcare bill took effect. We're not breaking any new ground here. In fact, we are respecting what is contained within our First Amendment to the Constitution and what has long been a bipartisan effort to respect the conscience rights of all Americans, whatever their religious views are. This vote goes to the heart of who we are. If we allow the government to dictate the coverage and plans paid for by religious institutions, that's the first step down a slippery slope. When religious liberty has been threatened in the past, members of both sides of the aisle of Congress have taken action to preserve our country's cherished freedoms. We must do so again now, or risk compromising a foundational American principle.
So what this debate is really about is whether Congress is going to sit by and idly allow this administration trample this freedom of religion, a core American principle, or whether we stand up and protect what our founding fathers put their lives on the line for and what millions of Americans today will defend. We cannot pick and choose when to adhere to the Constitution and when to cast it aside in order to achieve political prerogatives. We must consistently stand for our timeless constitutional principles. And the debate that is taking place is a stand to protect an inalienable right, the right of conscience, established in our nation's founding days and sustained for over 200 years. Now, I regret that this issue has been reframed for political purposes into a woman's right to choose, into denying women the opportunity to exercise their right to make their choice, because that is not what this is about at all. And yet, some have said it has been so successfully reframed that politically, those who defend this as a matter of religious conscience and freedom are on the losing side of the political argument. Well, we may be or we may not be. I think it's up to this body to decide that with a thorough debate and a vote, as I say, that puts our yeas and nays on the line. Nevertheless, whether it's a winner or a loser politically is irrelevant to the argument. It's irrelevant, should be irrelevant to the debate, because this clearly is a fundamental principle of religious freedom that needs to be protected regardless of the political consequences. And so those of us who are standing up to debate this are setting aside any kind of political risk, setting aside any advice that basically says, oh, you don't want to touch this because it's been reframed in a way that the American people don't understand it. So we're here today to basically say, here we stand. Here we stand to protect the liberties that are granted to us by our Constitution. And regardless of the political consequences, we will continue to do that.
The President's mandate refuses to acknowledge that the Constitution guarantees conscience protections. He instead tries to run around them. You don't accommodate religious liberty. You respect them. That's why they are enshrined in the Constitution. Those constitutional protections should prevent the President from trampling the conscience rights of Americans and religious institutions who hold a strong belief that contraceptives, sterilizations, drugs causing abortion are wrong. Clearly, however, these constitutional protections are not enough. President Obama's accommodation shows that he considers conscience rights to be an inconvenience in his effort to remake America in his vision. That is why we need the Respect for Rights of Conscience Act The Respect for Rights of Conscience Act, as introduced by my colleague from my neighboring state, Senator Blunt, seeks to restore conscience protections that existed before President Obama's health care law. These are the same protections, and I think this is really important, these are the same protections that have existed for more than 220 years since the First Amendment was ratified. The Senator from Missouri's bill has been offered as an amendment to the Surface Transportation Act, and we expect to vote on it as early as tomorrow. The amendment's goal is commendable, and I look forward to supporting it. It is simply ask the President to respect the religious liberties of Americans. Many long-standing federal health care conscience laws protect conscientious objections to certain types of medical services. President Obama could have just as easily followed that course when he issued a mandate requiring almost all private health insurance policies, including those issued by religious institutions such as hospitals, schools, and nonprofits, to cover sterilizations, contraceptives, including emergency contraceptives, at no cost to policyholders, but he did not. Now Congress must step up and protect the religious liberties of all Americans.